I think we all know the classic story of Battlestar Galactica's main tragedy. Humans get got right at the beginning, all the colonies of mankind burns, 99% of everyone dead, single lone Battlestar sets off to save what's left of humanity, and there's an utterly insane dude named Boltar that's responsible for everything. Both versions are nuts, but for very different reasons. All of these things are true across both the original and remastered BSG series, but one of the biggest questions that's left unanswered is, what if not all of those things I just said? Or more succinctly, what if the Cylons sneak attack failed and the colonials could fight back? There are so many different paths we can take here. It could be as simple as Boltar not giving away vital data to a woman he slept with because, dude, she's really hot. It could be more nuanced with the Cylon plan working, but only disabling some of the colonial fleet like they expected instead of all of it. It could be wildly different, and the second Cylon War could have started right here when Adama's stealth mission across the Armistice line caused the war to reignite. It could be the OG Boltar spontaneously combusting before he can betray mankind. However you've thought about it, because God, I have, could the colonials have actually won against the Cylon? Not just stalemated them, but really, fully, actually won. Hard maybe, and while this video will focus mostly on the remastered series because there's just a lot more information to dig into and a lot more fun to be had, there is a section near the end that deals with the original because I felt it deserved some love. And the most important thing is establishing what the conditions of the first Cylon War was like in the RDM series. For the most part, the conflict never really left the Cylons star system, or the place where the 12 colonies actually reside. When the Cylons rebelled, they stole a bunch of the old, scrapped or vulnerable ships, spacing their crews and pissing off. The war lasted 12 years, and for the first half it was mostly low-intensity skirmishes and raids launched by the Cylons against colonial targets. The colonies, not having really stepped up into a united warfront at this time, and the Cylons not really having any large bases to power their war effort, kinda just danced around each other. We do know about one major toaster base though, Avalon, a huge shipyard hidden in the Helios Alpha system that refit and produced most of the Cylon ships during the early war period. As the war went on, the Cylons were pushed further and further out of the colonies, denying their access to colonial comms and networks while also physically destroying their presence within the Cylons star system. By about the midpoint of the war, the Cylons had almost entirely relocated outside core human space and had rebuilt several moons, worlds, and outposts to mine, refine, and build for the war effort. While the colonials had centralized and dramatically expanded their already existing fleet yards and facilities into a juggernaut of military production. The armistice, however, that ended the first Cylon War was signed shortly after the Ghost Fleet Offensive, which was a colonial trick that lured most of the Cylon defensive fleets away to intercept false targets. The Ghost Fleet, having left long before that, burned every Cylon world they could find to the ground and crippled the toaster industry. And over the course of the armistice, the Cylons left human-chartered space, evacuating pretty much everything and moving to the colony, the giant space station that looks like a sea urchin, which they started building around this point. While the colonials rebuilt their industry and went absolutely ham on Battlestar production in the 40-odd years peace they had. So that's the state of the Cylons and humans just before the second Cylon War. The colonials had built a colossal new fleet of advanced Battlestars like the Mercury and Valkyrie, ready to headbutt anything into oblivion. Forehead to problem solving will always be the best kind, while presumably maintaining a large force of second-lined and mothballed first Cylon War designs if the berserk we see in BSG Razor is any indication. The Cylons, meanwhile, had a massive, moon-sized mobile space station, no it isn't the Death Star, called the Colony. While the Colony couldn't produce raw materials or anything, it was the Cylons' only shipyard and anchorage for pretty much their entire species, I guess, if you could call the toasters that. And it was also the coordination and control hub for the Cylons' first strike. So, what if these two forces smashed into each other? Well, assuming they just straight up start a slugging war like the first time around, I don't think things would go well for the Cylons at all. The reason is that while the Cylons were building the colony and rebuilding their industry, the colonials had advanced considerably and massively upscaled their fighting forces. The entire reason that the Cylons went with a surprise nuclear sunrise as their battle plan was because they didn't believe they could win a conventional war. And finally, we get to the part the entire video was about. Could the colonials have won? First scenario, the most similar one that only really has a single minor change. Originally, the Cylons were flabbergasted at their success. They expected to disable and destroy around 2/3 of colonial fleet and colonial fighting power before they routed out and fixed the viruses and backdoors in the CNP program. So that's the change we make. The Cylon plan works only as well as they expected. 2/3 of the colonial fleet is fucked. Most of the colonial command is wiped out in the opening salvos, and billions are dead, with some of the 12 colonies already essentially depopulated, with several more being invaded by toaster ground forces. Things are not looking good. But whether or not it's possible for the Cylons to push a military victory is another thing entirely. We've seen that the modern base star is really just a first strike weapon. Against a Mercury, or hell, even the old girl Galactica, they kinda suck ass and just die. With dozens of Battlestars alongside 100 or so other support ships, even with several hundred base ships, I don't know if the Toasters would be able to win a decisive battle. The way I think it's most likely to go is a relatively slow burn where the colonials are worn down a little more every day, death of a thousand cuts sort of thing. Most of the colonies would be in ruins by this point. Many of the orbital shipyards and manufactories keeping the fleet supplied and maintained are also dust, and with how the colonial government tried to surrender, it's possible they'd try to sue for peace with the Cylons, come to some sort of second armistice. But I think the far more likely outcome would be for the colonial forces to collapse, the fleet stretched too thin, trying to protect what was left of the colonies, and all the while the Cylons use their vastly superior jump drives and Dratus to run in, start a fight, and leave before any real damage could be taken. Maybe it takes months, maybe it takes years, but with colonial fleet tied to the ruins of the colonies and without resupply, it's only a matter of time before the colonials crumble and they're left in the same situation as the RDM series. Only this time around, there's most likely no successful attempt to flee until it's far too late, and whatever was left wouldn't have the same opportunities. So, shit, mankind gets smashed. But this is what I think would happen if the Cylon plan still mostly worked, but just not as ridiculously well as it did. Second scenario, the war goes hot before the Cylons are ready. When Adama and the Valkyrie launched the stealth ship across the armistice line, things could have spiraled very, very out of control. In canon, we know that Adama was ordered to prevent any and all evidence of breaches of the armistice line, and he chose to blow up the stealth star fighter Viper thing. But it's possible that either Adama or the Cylons could have escalated from this point. If Adama took the Valkyrie over the armistice line or sent Vipers to rescue the stealth star, that could have sparked a toaster response. Or if the Cylons responded with more than just a raider, say jumping in a base star and both sides started shooting. Whatever happens, or whether it's an incident, the second Cylon war goes hot, right now, spiraling out of control. In this scenario, both sides have advantages that make losing basically impossible, while winning is also basically impossible. Though the colonials absolutely have an advantage here. In this case, the colonial war machine is ready ahead of time and not subverted by the CNP program yet. They'll know that a fight started at the armistice line and put everything on high alert, expecting a follow-up attack. Hostilities en masse would probably start the same way that it did in canon, with fleets of Cylon ships jumping into orbit of the colonies or surrounding space. The reason that I think it would happen like this is because that's how the Cylons fought in the first war. Why bother taking or holding ground or establishing perimeters and patrol when they just need to obliterate the colonies to win? They'd probably also still be using a lot of their first Cylon war designs, the classic wagon wheel base stars and stuff. I'd expect some serious tactical successes for the Cylons, maybe destroying or wrecking orbital infrastructure across the colonies and probably killing several billion people in the opening moves, but I don't think it would be enough to achieve any form of real strategic advantage. The colonial fleet would probably also inflict grievous losses on any Cylon forces that moved against more important targets. Fleet command, shipyards, anchorages, and the main population centers of the colonies would probably all be very well defended. And this is where the stalemate comes in, because we've got a bit of an issue. The Cylon fleet at this point in time was transitioning from a more varied fleet to the first strike-only modern base ship. They wouldn't really be equipped to handle the type of war that just started. But the problem here for the colonials is, how do they counterattack? The Cylons had already moved pretty much all of their, well, everything to the colony, said colony being a super ship space station hybrid that can move around, build base ships, and presumably stop off anywhere to mine resources. It's extremely difficult to track ships after they jump in the BSG universe. Extremely difficult, but not impossible. We also know from the first Cylon War that the colonials are able to and did scout vast distances away from human space in order to find Cylon infrastructure and destroy it during the Ghost Fleet offensive. So while it would probably take a very long time, it is only a matter of time before the colonials track down the colony. But ironically enough, and as fucking hilarious as it sounds, I think in this scenario we get a reverse of the RDM series, where instead of the Galactica running away, it's the colony constantly moving around, running from base star fleets hunting the thing as it creates and launches raiding parties to go attack mankind. I don't think the Cylon fleet would ever allow itself to actually be destroyed in full, but I think they would suffer heavy losses in any initial fighting and take a more defensive position for the rest of the war. And I see this scenario ending one of two ways. Either the colony is eventually caught, or the Cylons just kinda fuck off. If the colony is caught, I think it's going to be a hell of a last stand. With what we see of the thing, its size, armaments, and protection, it's a huge ship, armed to the teeth, and built like a spiky brick shithouse, which coincidentally sounds like a very awful time, I might add. The colonials would probably have to commit and sacrifice a lot of ships just to get past the defending fleets, then spend unimaginable amounts of munitions pummeling it into dust. Or they do the colonial version of the atomic parade and just slam an ungodly amount of nuclear weapons into the damn thing until it stops shooting back, then slam even more into it until the bits are so small you're not getting Dratus returns anymore. The other outcome is, well, the colony can move. So the Cylons eventually just get tired of fighting like they did in the RDM series, or simply calculate that the colonials can't hurt them anymore, not really, unless they stay, and the Cylons can run farther and faster than any human ship could ever hope to catch them. The Cylons could continue to perfect their mechanical forms and simply fuck off to go live on the other side of the galaxy. By this point, there's nothing that actually ties the Cylons to the colonies anymore besides wanting to destroy humanity and sentiment. The sentiment part is very strong though. The colonies are as much the Cylons' home as it is the humans, and the Toasters have strong religious ties as well because of their weird cult faith thing that's never fully explained. Cavil, while being the most militant of the Cylon models, was also the one that wanted the most to be free of a human body and be a machine. Smell dark matter, see gamma rays, that whole speech. Does this count as a colonial win? Yeah, I guess. The second Cylon War would either end with the Cylons being destroyed or getting so fed up with humanity's pig-headed bullshit that they just nope out and go do whatever robots do in another galaxy or something. There's also a really common talking point that I want to address, and that's the first Cylon War never really ended, and the Cylons rightly feared humanity would never stop hunting them. Yeah, I think a lot of people like to blame humanity for violating the armistice line and generally being bastards. The Cylons go on a lot in the series about their reasonings, and a lot of them are valid, but like, the Cylons are hypocrites and liars. Blatant hypocrites and liars, I might add. They espouse democracy with their voting system, then box up an entire line of their own models because they disagreed. They hate mankind for enslaving them, and then try to enslave the Centurions and Raiders by literally lobotomizing them. Mankind sent diplomats every single year without fail to the Armistice Station, and the Cylons say that humanity was never willing to accept peace. Meanwhile, the Cylons didn't send anyone until, bam, genocide. Like, if I were the colonials, I'd be pretty suspicious about what's going on if no talking was happening at all. Like, real peace and negotiation is a two-way street. Look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. If either side refused to talk, World War III would have happened. Guaranteed. The colonials did the bare fracking minimum and constantly held a knife behind their back. That's completely true. But the Cylons couldn't even meet that low a bar before deciding it was genocide or bust. I could really go on forever about this. Maybe I'll make like a whose fault was it sort of video as a follow-up, because I really think it was both sides being dickheads and refusing to accept that maybe they were wrong. And man, the Cylons may deny it all they want, but they really are humanity's children. Like parent, like child. Hypocritical warmongers operating on fear and suspicion. Bastards to their core, one and all. And the last RDM scenario I want to talk about, what if the colonial stealth missions actually worked? And this seems very similar to the last one, but this is a really big point of departure because this is something I think would dramatically shake up the universe. The colonial fleet successfully manages to stealthily infiltrate Cylon space well ahead of the Cylon plans for the sneak attack. I think in this case we'd get a bit of a reverse of the Cylon sneak attack. Assuming the stealth missions work, the colonial fleet would be confronted by the fact that not only is Cylon space entirely quiet, it's also entirely empty. The only thing that these stealth missions would find are regular patrols guarding the armistice line and then nothing for vast expanses of space. Any Cylon ships that show up jump straight to the armistice line from somewhere farther out than previously thought, since there's no sign of active travel or infrastructure at all, and eventually, though it may take years of cautious and slow exploration, these expeditions would discover the Cylon colony, and from there, absolute horror. Colonial fleet was, at this point in lore, extremely antsy about what was going on with the toasters. Politicians were more than happy to propose budget cuts and readiness reductions to save taxpayers money, but the Admiralty and defense boards were sure, 100% convinced that something was coming. Hence why they tried those stealth missions to begin with. Upon finding the Cylons and presumably discovering the hundreds of modern base ships being constructed, they would inevitably draw the conclusion that this was meant for a second Cylon war. What other reason would the toasters have to pull all of their infrastructure out of strike distance while also building up a massive fleet of what looked to be modernized base stars? I don't think this would necessarily result in an immediate strike. I think instead colonial fleet would quietly ready itself en masse. Would they be aware of the skin job infiltration? No, but they would be very aware of how the Cylons infiltrated and used colonial comm systems and ground-based networks in the last war, so taking precautions to limit who had access to this knowledge, what was networked, and how much of it was available to be transmitted would most likely do the job of hiding the true nature of these military preparations until it was way too late. In this scenario, the Cylons don't have the CNP backdoor to just shut off the colonial fleet. It's highly unlikely that the Admiralty and all of the higher-ups would have allowed Gaius Baltar's new navigation program to be installed. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Right before a huge military operation, let's do a massive overhaul of our entire fleet's electronic infrastructure? Nah, it wouldn't happen. Caught unprepared with most of their fleet proverbially in dry dock or under construction or just hanging around whatever, the battle would be massive but short. Hundreds of Battlestars and other sub-capital ships throwing everything they had at the colony, while Vipers screened and harassed any Cylons, ships, and raiders that managed to get up and into the fight. Most of the Cylons are probably wiped out in the opening volley, and while a fleet this large is guaranteed to win quick, the colonials still take a shit-kicking. Potentially, many Cylon ships would try to jump into the colonies themselves, hoping or assuming that with this massive surprise attack, they were left undefended. And while billions would still probably die across numerous colonies because of these strikes, by the end, the Cylons would have been functionally destroyed. Their only real infrastructure reduced to atoms, their fleet splintered to a few errant ships, and mankind severely bruised, but otherwise perfectly capable of continuing the fight. This is the most depressing ending for the Cylons because all of their fears come true. Their creators betrayed the armistice they signed, obliterated most of the toasters, and would probably spend the following years and decades hunting down the last remaining toasters. A reverse genocide compared to what we got in the official series. The fate of any Cylon skin jobs would also probably suck a lot. There may be some minor Cylon survivors, like maybe a base star or two escape, but it's highly unlikely that they would ever be able to actually build up to a threat to the colonies again. So, hooray! The colonials actually definitively win. The toasters are basically dead for good. What now? The unified colonial front falls apart immediately, and the various colonies go back to hating each other, and probably splintering into spheres of power and influence. Vergon and Leonis, the two old imperial powers before the Cylons, would probably get uppity again, though this time there would be more power players. Like Caprica is the center of commerce and tech, and Scorpia due to its huge fleet yards and orbital construction facilities. There's a chance here that the Quorum of 12 and the United Colonies of Kobol would stay together, but since the smaller worlds like Tauron, Sagittaron, and Erelon were kinda nothing compared to their bigger neighbors, whom they hated and whom would constantly take advantage of them, calling them the breadbasket of the colonies or labeling them as dirt eaters as a racial slur. You know, and I think at the end of the day, it turns into one of those, woo, the great enemy is defeated, now let's kill each other again like the good old days. And those are some of my what-if scenarios. Some bleak and miserable, some pretty neutral, some pretty bleak and miserable, just for the other guys this time. But overall, I do think it was very possible for the colonials to actually win against the Cylons. They just got slapped by that surprise attack and had all potential of fighting back destroyed in the opening seconds of the fight. So it completely removed any of their potential. But in a straight up stand-up fight, yeah, I think the colonials do kick the shit out of the Cylons, and I think they pull a pretty convincing hard victory. And before we end off, a shorter section for the OG Battlestar Galactica. And I'm using Undertale music here because it feels tonally appropriate for something short and sweet. Now, the main reason the Cylons in the original wanted to wipe out mankind wasn't just because they were an enemy. The Cylon Empire had numerous enemies, and there were other alien species fighting them off-screen or mentioned in passing. The issue was that mankind was not only the most technologically advanced, but spreading ideas like freedom and liberty and democracy. Truly horrid concepts. The colonials were also suggested to be arming other factions or helping them against the Cylons. When the Galactica survived the Cylon sneak attack, the Cylons pursued her so fervently because it was a huge risk. If it escaped and disappeared, it could use its technology and ideology to arm uprisings and new enemies that could fight the Cylons on equal footing, and they did not want that. So now for the what if. Well, the Cylon sneak attack fails, and there was plenty of opportunity for it to. Boltar gets ignored, Adama gets listened to, the colonial fleet is put on readiness beforehand just in case. Whatever it is, the colonial fleet of Battlestars responds in time to save themselves and the colonies, probably taking losses, but nothing they can't bounce back from. From here, mankind is probably done with the robots. Very much an Imperial Japan and no Germany kind of thing, where there is no negotiation, only the total destruction of the Cylon menace forever. It's taken 1,000 years so far to get to the point the Toasters think they need subtlety and tricks to win, and I imagine it would take hundreds, maybe thousands more for them to lose outright, but over time the Cylons' fears would come true. Mankind finds more aliens oppressed and threatened by the Cylons, secretly or openly arms and supports them, and inch by inch, world by world, the Cylons are pushed back, destroyed and routed by an ever-growing list of enemies pressing in from all sides. Sure, some species probably get ganked into an early extinction because the Cylons were heavy-handed monsters like that, but it's not enough and the Cylons can't stop the snowball. The death of every empire everywhere. There's just too many problems across too many areas of your border, and you just can't handle them all. And eventually, generations after the failed sneak attack, with peace having proved to be impossible, the last Cylon base star is destroyed, the last Toaster world falls, and the galaxy gets to enjoy a time of peace afterwards. Probably with most of the various factions going off to do their own things and not stirring the pot, since, well, the world of BSG 1978 was a campier, lighter one than the remaster. So a sort of, and then everyone was friends, feels like an appropriate ending to a thousands-year-long war. Although, to be honest, any ending to a thousands-year-long war would probably feel a little silly at that point. And to everyone that loves the original, I just want you to know I could have done what I did for every English essay I have ever written in my life and stretched this out 10 times longer than it should have been, put it in its own video, and then expected all of the accolades for doing that. You may thank me for being a merciful god. No, you may not start a rebellion in the name of freedom and democracy, and the species called man must die. And that's that. Thank you for watching my shitty fanfiction ideas. If you've made it this far though, you're probably the target audience of fellow Turbo Nerds, so why not leave a like, sub, comment, ring the bell, and all that stuff to help the channel out. If you're feeling generous, Sai has a Patreon where you can throw money at my Not Dying Fund. Or if you just want to hang out, we've got a Discord full of other weirdos, geeks, and nerds. To the people already supporting the channel, a huge thanks to the arms dealers providing all the toys and tools you saw in today's video for me to play with. To the food merchants, a hefty thank you for making sure I don't starve. And to the coffee vendors fueling my war against sleep, thank you very much. The war goes well. I didn't get to bed until like 5 a.m. last night. Is that even considered last night, or would that be this morning? You know what? It's not important. And with that, we're done. No idea what else to say. Outros are hard. Goodbye.